special AVST Academy webinar. Today's topic is best practices for backing up and restoring your CXE. And Pat Haney, our training manager, is going to be presenting this and walking us through the process. So just wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and I'll let you know just a couple of quick things before I turn it over to Pat. We are recording this, so we will send out a link to the recording once it's available. So if you get interrupted or you want to go back and review any of this content, we'll make that available to you. And we will also have time for questions at the end. And just want to draw your attention to the question box. If you would like to submit a question at any time during the webinar, we'll have those queued up. If you have it minimized, use the orange arrow in the upper right corner, and then you should see the question box there towards the bottom if you'd like to submit. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Pat.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Okay, today we're going to go over a bunch of different methods and practices for backing up your CXE, or backing up and restoring. It'll actually be a special treat because I just installed the brand new software, so you'll be able to see kind of what's coming down the pipe if you have an 8.7 system. So why back up? A lot of times you have policies in an organization. This is just what you do to your servers. It's to protect losing your data, having your data corrupted and stuff like that. I look at it a little bit differently from more of a technical standpoint. I back up to stop the pain if I have a failure of any way, shape, or form. By having backups and the amount of backup that you have dictates how easy it is to get a system running again or restored again once there is some sort of calamity that causes it not to work. A lot of times there's you don't feel the pressure to do that, especially on a CXE system, because it's just running in the corner. It's not something that like in a normal database, you'd have people accessing every day and notice when it's running, and it tends to get forgotten sometimes. But another reason to back up, just in general, is the CXE makes it too easy not to. It does a lot of it itself, and it takes very, very little effort to go one extra step and make sure that your data is secure, so that if you have a problem, you can just go ahead and fix it. So we're going to go over, there's 4 different flavors or types of backup that you can do with a CXE system. And they all have their pluses and minuses. They all provide something that's useful in a restore situation, but each one of them has its own little quirks that you basically need to use a combination of these in order to be safe. So we're going to start off with one of the fundamentals here, and this is in our training class. The CXE system is a Windows series of services, really, but I was going to say an application, and it's running on Windows Server software. It might be on a hardware server. More often than not these days, it's running on VMware or Hyper-V. So the good part about this is everything, when it comes to like third-party backups, that works with a Windows server that's running a database will work for CXE for the most part. We don't have anything in our system that's really proprietary and special. We use MySQL, we use standard drivers, we use standard technology with the Windows operating system in order to make this work. So any of the capabilities of VMware and Microsoft or Hyper-V, like screenshot or snapshots and stuff like that, that'll work, except for, remember, there's a database there. And unlike a lot of other more business type applications, this is a 24/7 database. It is always running, and it has to be running to answer calls and process the calls. So those restrictions apply as well. And this is where the third party, this is one of the holes in a third party type backup. So these type backup agents, and they're pretty famous, Backup Exec, Commvault, and stuff like that. They do a good job of backing up the machine itself. And I'd probably throw in the VMware snapshots and stuff like that into this category. It will get you back to where the system was at least some point. Operating system goes back and stuff like that. The benefit here of these third-party groups or third-party solutions are you generally work this into an enterprise backup scheme or solution. So you have a process that extracts the data and a process for storing the data. It may be in a different storage network. It may be off-site, something like that. If you have a really big network, you generally have a dedicated network just for the backups so they don't slow down the rest of it. So this stuff is in place usually in any decent size enterprise just for regular servers and stuff like that. And it's easy to roll in a CXE system with this as well. And it gives you, a reasonably decent level of protection. It will back up like Web Phone Manager, CX Mobile Services, Integrated Client Access, Digital Network, all the things that, or all the services that are with the CXE system itself. It does a really good backup of these, especially with the web type services like mobile services and Web Phone Manager. Those don't have a database, so they can literally just be copied and put right back if there's a problem. However, there's some exclusions that you have to have when you're using a third-party backup agent. And the first one is in the DCXDB folder. That's where we keep our MySQL database. You have to exclude that. And if you're running Neverfail, you have to exclude the working folder because these have active open databases. So generally, you want to avoid these because the unthinkable could happen. If the system's messing with the database or the backup software is trying to back that open database up and it's doing something, that could cause you kind of trouble. So we have a solution for this, and it happens every day at a routine that we call daily maintenance. It does a number of things. It does its database and file cleanup. If you've told the CXE to go out and make sure people's lamps are in the proper status, it will go do that. It will back itself up in a folder, DCX backup. If you have online backup, which we're going to get to in a bit, it will do that as well. And then as an extra kind of added thing, if you create a batch file called dailymaintUser.bat, it will run that batch file during the daily maintenance routine. That batch file can be anything, and we're going to find out towards the end of this presentation some of the cool stuff we can do with that utility. But it's a basic Windows batch file, which means all those commands that you could type into a command line and do will more or less work. I mean, you could just copy files, run programs, send status messages and stuff like that. That's what that batch file can do. Not really hard to program. And lastly, it logs all the maintenance activities into the event log. They're basically information status type logs. So you can see every day what was backed up, what if the it'll do the file fix up, send a message. It'll do the refresh, send a message. It'll do the backup, send a message, that type of thing. So you'll be able to audit to make sure these things have been happening for you in your CXE system. What it does is it creates a batch file, or it creates a zip file. It has the MySQL database. It has your license, registry settings, templates, and stuff like that. We can actually come over and take a peek at this. And let me open up a file here. Under your CX system backup, you see I have a couple of these. They happen every day at daily maintenance. It's the mnemonic is basically the server name and a date stamp. And you can see logs, configuration, phrase templates, registry stuff, logs, some XML configuration files, your feature key, that kind of thing. There's something missing from this though. And since we have audio, I can't blocked. I can't really say what that is or let people guess, but it's basically speech. The daily maintenance routine that backs up every day, backs up the system itself, does not have any speech, which we're going to get to in a bit. You access this, or the schedule for this, there's actually two places. One is in the daily maintenance, or in the daily maintenance tab of the server configuration. The other one is actually in the administration utility. You can set the time and the message log retention and stuff like that from there as well. So you generally schedule this on an off hour. Like by default, it's 2 a.m. You would generally have it run at a quiet time of the day. It's not going to shut the system down. The system will continue to answer calls. However, you don't generally want to be doing things like that, or this kind of backup routine, during a production time. I can tell you from experience what you're going to get is a lot of rings to answer, or more rings than you would expect. I always kind of joked in my live classes, this is what an hourglass looks like to a telephone, is ringing. So basically you're going to put it as 2 a.m. is usually good, but remember, if you're using a third-party backup utility, you want to capture all this data as well. So you're going to have this thing run maybe an hour or two before the third-party agent runs, so that the system has done its backups, and then you can back up this data as well. So you already have a system backup in place. And you'll see over there in the bottom corner, we have a certain number of days of backups we can keep on the server, or designate we want to keep, how much logs, and how many days of speech utterances. And this is something most people might not be aware of. What the CX system will do is record stuff if you have a speech automated attendant. So it's actually kind of useful to go back if somebody says, well, I tried to say this name or this command, it never worked. You can actually go back and look for those WAV files and listen to what they said. That's what kind of a troubleshooting feature for speech. So this happens every day. You don't have to do anything other than really set the time, and it shows up in the CX backup directory. So where this comes into play, or where this is useful, is if you had a failure and you used your third-party backup to restore the server, you would then do the maintenance restore, or the restore from this backup, to then sync your system back up and get it running again. When you do this, though, the CX speech directory, you need to have your recordings and messages in there. This is where they're stored. We don't store those in the database themselves. What we store in the database is pointers. So what happens is, if you do a restore and you resync this thing, but the speech is not there, people are going to go into their mailboxes, at least the first time, and it's going to say, you have 5 messages or 1 message or something like that. They go to listen to the message, it's going to say that message has been lost. That's what it tells you when it goes to grab that actual message and the message is not there. The other flip side of that is, if you have those messages in the speech directory that didn't go away, but then you restored from an earlier backup, then you will have what are called orphan speech files. And those are speech files in that directory that the database will never deliver to the user. So that's a problem, but not a huge problem. Where it manifests itself is when you're moving platforms and you want to copy all this data over to another more powerful machine. You don't want to spend your time a few hours copying over files that will be no use to you. So to do this, you go to the CX folder, you back it up rather using whatever method you want, or restore it rather, your third-party backup software. I would also say that you can also do this by just reinstalling the operating system, reinstalling CX, and then doing this as well. It's a lot more time consuming than a snapshot or something like that would have. So you basically use the same utility. We get back here. in this system here, let me shut it down so we can see what's going on. It's a small enough system, this shouldn't take forever. So he says. Wow. So basically, when the system is first installed, before you start it up, or after you've restored it from, say, a third-party backup, in the database tab, you'll see reinitialize and recover. Recover would be, I'm going to restore my database to the active system or the system that's working right now. Reinitialize, which we'll see in a bit, that will wipe this system clean, and it will basically start over from scratch. And we're gonna take a peek at that in a little bit. I'm not going to do it because we don't have time to sit there and watch bars roll on a screen. So in addition to the daily maintenance backup, we have something called online backup, which appeared early in version 8.0. What an online backup does is it will then take not only the backup folder, but it will take your report data and it will take your speech, and it will copy that over to another drive, typically a network drive, that you designate to have this data copied to. What it will do, though, is an incremental backup of recordings. So if you're going to move this, I think I have that on the next slide. Right. So you set this up. If you move this, you will have to copy from where it was, copy the files to where they are going to and make sure that you have a full backup here. You also use the CX File Manager service account. That must have permissions, read and write permissions to whichever public drive that you are going to copy these files to. And one thing you have to remember too with this has days of retention as well. So when you're calculating this, you're going to have your system backup, which is actually relatively small. You're going to have the system voice, and by that I'm talking about right down here where you see greetings, names, announcements. That's the system voice, prompts, that kind of thing. And then the messages times however many days of this package you are saving. So if you have a rather large message store, you're going to have that many days of that large message store. That isn't as important these days as it would have been in the past. This particular one that I have mine set up on, get back here, is basically a network appliance, a storage SAN. It's like $300 or something like that, and it has 2 terabytes, which is an enormous amount of storage, especially even for a CX. So, and like I said before, it's so easy to do this, to just put in the notation here of the share that you made, and then every day, online backup goes out and throws everything that has to do with your system in this online backup. Here's kind of the cool thing. You'll see this is all kind of grayed out here, and this is one of the new fancy things in CX 8.7 Update 1, which just came out. What it's doing is online backup works a little bit different than it used to work. So what you'll see is the screen here, say automatic refresh, and you'll see 100% here. What it's doing is doing continuous backup of the speech files so that it speeds up daily maintenance. And so rather than having to copy this massive message store or even an incremental message store, that it's always there during the day. And it's really kind of cool. If you press show details, you can see what it's backing up. I don't have any messages on the system, so there's nothing to back up, but you can see all the different voice files and the report data, what it found, and how many would be pending if it was happening and stuff like that. It's actually a very, very cool tool. So, and again, the backup retention section is down here. I only have 7 days. I don't really have a live system I count on for messaging, so 7 days is really ample for me. It's just space after all. So this is a full backup. An online backup has everything that you need. So when you would use this, or when this would come into play, would be when you've replaced the server or you've reinstalled CX. Also helps if you're migrating. So it will put the system back exactly like it was during the backup. And there's two different ways to do this. One of them during the CX setup looks something like this. This screen will come up. If you press that initialize button in the database tab, you're going to see a whole lot of stuff happening that you have no control over. And what's happening is basically your database is being blown away and rebuilt. Then you will have a screen like this. And one of the choices on the radio button there is to recover your system from the backup. And once you do that and you select the zip file, it's going to put that CX server exactly back to the way it was before you press the initialization key, or actually when the last backup was happening. So you can also use the same thing if you've already installed it. You've already installed the system again. You can also do the restore button or recover button and do the same thing, and it will put the voice and stuff back. Now after that, this happens on the system server. You can also do it on the call servers. So if you had a failure from your system server, and this is where all your speech is pretty much, you would put the system server back into service. Then you're going to have to go out to your call servers, which have already been answering calls the whole time, and make sure that you resync them. And you'll find that in that same database tab, you'll see a button called resync. Actually, I think I can show that, even though I don't really have one. Over here in the database tab, mine's running, so they're grayed out. You'll see this button, resync. You will also see on a call server down here in this blank area, you will see a status of the replication between the call server and a system server, and it will flag and say, I haven't been able to talk, or I haven't synced up yet, or something like that. It'll tell you, it'll be pretty obvious that it's not talking to the mothership, and you need to intervene and sync up the database. But that's generally the way to get this stuff running again. This is kind of for a catastrophic failure, though. You don't get all of the, it's an all or nothing thing. So when you back up or you restore, you're basically building that new CX server again. And it's can be a big process if you have a lot of messages in your message store that's being recovered. It can be pretty time consuming. However, it's pretty cool. This is actually sort of how the systems are upgraded. It's also the way they're migrated. And it'll be happy with just about any CX8 backup within reason, I'm thinking. I've never had any problem with it. I've restored from my other servers, and they'll say, wow, you have this different switch. Do you want to use this instead? Or this one's missing. Do you want to use this one instead? And it's been pretty happy with it. Now, one of the big things here is, and this is really kind of important, if you're restoring, say you're going to do a migration or something like that, and you have it on a lab system, and you're going to reinstall, and you're going to recover, and then plan to move it later, you got to isolate it from your production system. And reason being is, when you're even on a test system, right, you go out and you say, okay, I don't need this right now. I'm going to remove this call server because I'm going to jiggle things around. You do something like that to a test system, it doesn't know that it's a test system. And it's going to go out to the system server. It's going to find it through DNS, and it's going to do what you just told it to do, but it's going to do it to the production system. So you got to make sure that if you're doing this in like a lab environment, make sure that you can't get to the production system, because it will reach out and start making changes to your production system, and it'll be kind of, it won't be apparent that that happened. You'll be on your lab system, you'll make a change, it'll look like it worked, and then next thing you know, something bad happened to the one that was running. So you got to be very careful when you're doing this. There are some limitations. Remember all those things we showed with the third-party backup things, Dialogic, AccuLab, digital networking, client access. Those are not restored with the online backup. Those are all separate type applications that are installed in the Windows operating system, especially the Dialogic and AccuLab drivers. So those will have to be restored in addition to doing the online restore. So this is why the third-party backup solution is actually kind of helpful, because it will have all the settings and the configurations for these adjunct type services in there. This is all an all or nothing thing. Like I said before, you get all the mailboxes and the messages as of that time, or if you're doing a local restore or restore from the regular daily maintenance, you get just the mailboxes and nothing else. So it is kind of a limitation from that standpoint. The fix for this is a utility we have called Mailbox Archive. What that is basically a mailbox backup, and it's meant to work in conjunction with either the local or the online backup that you have. It doesn't have any of the system configuration, licensing, report data, stuff like that, but it does have everything you need to know about mailboxes. And the backup part of this has both a GUI front end, which is super easy to use, and a command line, which you can then run in that batch file. It does have a limitation, though, of 2 gig. And generally what you'll do if you're trying to get a full backup and it's bigger than 2 gig is you'll have multiple archives. You'll just break out the archives by types so that you have more files spread over. This is what it looks like. It's run on the system server. We can actually run it on ours if you want to see it actually do something. You can do this with the system running. Mailbox Archive works both backup and restore with the system working. And you can see it's a very complicated thing. Restore button, backup button, or file backup, file restore. You can pick what types of logs you want to see when you do a backup, but that's pretty much it. So to do a backup, you just press the key, give it a name, and then it will ask you what you want to have in your backup. You can say everything, click all mailboxes, include everything, even administrators, or you can just hunt and peck and back up this or that types of mailbox. And this is not an all or nothing application. This is I have a full backup here, and then when I go to restore, I can restore whatever it is from that backup that I want to restore. It gives you a lot of flexibility. I can say, okay, I'm going to do some automated attendant changes. I just want all my call processors. And you can do it all by mailbox type, or you can pick, this or that mailbox to back up. There's something here called enforced dependencies. And what that is, let me highlight one of these. You'll see dependencies here. It's in mailbox 000, but then there was another go to call processor function in there to go to 0300. So another thing you'll see is in a subscriber mailbox, if they sponsor somebody, there's a relationship there. Or if you have an interactive mailbox, that depends on its sponsor as well. So anything in a mailbox, or better yet, a distribution list, is dependent on its members. So when you enforce dependencies, it's going to back up the entire relationship rather than just the one mailbox. It will have everything that's included, so you're not trying to restore bits and pieces that may not be connected any longer. So I'll just do them all. And you just press backup and it runs. I mean, I have a small system, and there's no messages in it really, so there's really nothing to it. There is a bit of time it'll take on a really large system, but not overly tough. So if you want to run this in the command line mode, you put it in that daily main user bat. You can also probably do it in Windows Scheduler if you want. And then there's a series of switches. The command is AT_archive, and then you have a series of switches. And that AT_archive is in the DCX bin directory. This seems awful complicated. I never really worry about it all that much. One of the things to remember here, if you have any kind of command line experience, in CX bin is where you're going to find all of our executables. And if you type in AT_archive /?, that's help. So you do that, you get a screen that looks like this, which says, okay, here's all my switches. /backup does a backup. Arc file is the archive. Log files, the log file. All is all the mailbox. Admins include everything. Run the subscriber mailboxes only, that type of thing. It helps you do this. In our admin guide and our backup archive guide, there's also instructions for this as well. And it's really, really, really not that tough. The good thing is, too, you can do this with the system running. So you can go to CX bin, create that batch file, put it in here and play with it, all the different switches, and then see it run or see it not. It's not going to make the system, it's not going to affect the system one way or the other if it works or doesn't work. You can do the archive with the system running. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but it's not going to do anything to the system. And you'll notice I kind of used a trick here, the %date%. So everyday daily maintenance, what I'm doing here is I'm creating a log file and I'm doing a full backup. And I'm doing it to another folder on my hard drive. Now, if I had done this and I had a third-party backup solution, those would be folders that I would back up so that I would have that data retained. So if you look at the archives, what that results in is a log and an archive that is the day of the week. So it will constantly overwrite and give you 7 days of archives that then you can copy each one off into different folders onto a network drive with either dailymaintUser.bat, or you could do it with a third-party backup routine or something like that. In the past, I've added a command to that batch file that is like xcopy darchive ***/s or something like that to a network location. So create the archive, copy it someplace else, and then I got basically 2 copies of it, and I'm fully protected. So the restore works just like the backup. You click on the restore, and then you have a couple choices here. Overwrite existing mailboxes. So if you don't check that, of course, it's going to restore every mailbox that isn't there. Overwrite, it will overwrite the existing mailboxes. And then if you say preserve existing recordings, it will overwrite the mailboxes. And then if they have any recordings, name, greeting, stuff like that, it will leave those and not copy them from the backup. But here's the cool thing. If a message just happens to not exist, then it will go put that back as well. So it's a great way to be able to recover this or that mailbox on the fly, rather than having to rebuild it again and then have them have to set up their mailbox again and then have no messages. Now, there is a limitation here too. If you're using server-based unified messaging, the messages are actually stored on the email server. So you're not going to have those. Those are going to be on Exchange or Notes or whatever, whatever email server you're using. So there won't be any messages for this thing to back up. But it will back up all the configuration to the mailboxes. Now, a couple of things. When you go to restore, basically things have to exist. The archive is meant to be used on an existing running system of a certain level. So it's expecting the same mailboxes, same mailbox length, same database, that kind of thing. It's not like the backup and restore from the online backup that you can just take all your mailboxes from this archive and throw them into this new machine. It's expected that you're just putting mailboxes back on an existing system that look just like the one from the archive. That is the limitation. It doesn't affect CX's operation, as I said before, but expect about 2 hours per gigabyte. So if you're doing a lot of messages, message restoring and stuff like that, it's going to take a bit of time to put all that stuff back from an archive. Still, I mean, you have the two of them all in a row, or you have all these different solutions, or you have this, you can put those mailboxes exactly back the way they were before they went away. So some of the best practices. We basically suggest that you use a number of different methods, not just one, in order to keep your system backed up. Like, use an enterprise backup client, because if it folds right into your normal Windows backup routines, go ahead and do that. Make sure that it starts after daily maintenance is completed so that you're capturing all that kind of data. And remember, as you copy this stuff, like say you do the archive like I did to a folder, or you do an online backup to, say, another hard drive on the CX, which is actually pretty fast. Once that's done, then you can have the backup routine that you already have running on all your other servers, back that up, move it to the backup network, have it archived off-site and that type of thing, so you have plenty of protection and plenty of options if you have to restore. Definitely set the online backup. Typically use a network file server. We've been looking mostly at the system server, but you should be backing up your call servers as well. It's not, call servers basically have the call control settings and stuff like that. They have a database identical to the system server. It's just that they pass messages and voice and stuff like that over to the system server. They cache that. You don't have independent access to it. So it still is it's a smart move to have those backups for the call servers. In case you have a call server failure, you reinstall it and put it right back the way it was. Your alternative is having to reinstall it and attach it back to the system server, which means you're going to have to delete the old one, which no longer exists, and then put a new one in there. And it'll be a little bit more tedious. It'll work, but it'll be a little bit more time consuming. Remember, this is all set on the appetite for risk you might have, or the traffic. If you have a more call intensive and message intensive infrastructure, you're going to do much more backup than if you're not that intensive on it and the messages go to an email message store. You can do the automatic stuff and you'll be fine. Definitely do the archive. Run that from the batch file to a local drive and have your enterprise backup. Grab that and put that on a separate location as well. Another couple things, definitely document what you're supposed to see or supposed to happen. This is probably one of the things I found over my career, not only with AVST, but even before, that you go into a new environment and the person who knew what was going on is not there anymore. So you should definitely make sure that you have some sort of documentation about what's happening, what should be backed up, where it's backed up, who is in charge of this, who is monitoring this, who are the people, if it's a vendor, who are the people you need to call if there's a system failure, that type of thing. Another thing that's really a really good idea is to store your media wherever you're storing your backups, and even on CX to some extent. One of the things we do here when we install a system is we back up or we copy the software and all the patches and all the different things we'll need we copy that to the CX system itself for two reasons. One is to have that software if you need it, and the second is that it is much, much faster to reinstall a CX system if that software is sitting on the hard drive already. It's about 8 gig, but having it there, once you got if you had to do this all manually, reinstall Windows, somehow fix it, then copy all this stuff back over, getting the system up to the point where you can do a restore is about half hour, if that, if you have the media already copied over to the hard drive. It generally takes me, I have a tiny system, but it generally takes me about 20 minutes to get to the point where I can say, okay, restore from my backup, and then put the system back running. So, and if you're using a virtual machine and you're doing this with a snapshot, it's even faster. So you should be doing audits. Make sure, like, look at your event log, make sure that this maintenance is happening, make sure that your backups are there, make sure that the backups you have will restore to the level that you have and that type of thing. And basically have all this stuff documented, who, what, where, how, to get the system running again. Backup is not like archive. You can have all your messages, like in a third-party solution, you can back up that speech directory. You're going to have a whole bunch of WAV files with 17-digit names, and you don't know who they are. So it's really hard to search through them. The archive is a much better way to do this. We do have the ability to do archiving using Symantec Enterprise Vault. You can actually archive these things off-site. There is other configurations where you can actually have messages stored on a SAN. I think we have some customers that do that as well. That's something you'd probably have to check with our sales engineers about. So, but once you have that, that backup is, like I said, an all or nothing thing, basically. Now, that being said, we saw that in our brand new shiny software. When it's copying messages most of the time. So I think it's a lot less than the same day, since it's doing it live pretty much. Backups also not a high availability solution. Your warranty basically on hardware for us is like next day service. It'll take a while to put that thing back from a box, a server in a box. A lot faster on a virtual machine, but there is a time limitation there. It's not if you have a critical application, you need the CX running 24/7 all the time, even in failure. You need to investigate something like Never Fail and much more robust hardware. Multiple call servers, load balancers on your web phone manager and stuff like that. Now, also high availability, though, is not a solution to backup either. The worst nightmares I've had working as a technician were going to customers that they thought they were covered because they had RAID drives and multiple power supplies and stuff like that, and then it failed. And they didn't have any backup. And they didn't have even the backup from the one they had was from before an upgrade. So basically you're talking about all night long of trying to get this thing running again. And the really sad and disturbing thing is about a year later, they did the same thing. They didn't even learn from that. So it's too easy not to back up your data, especially if you put it in a batch file. You basically are having 2 levels of backup happening every day automatically. And then when you plug in the archive, you're having that happen automatically. So there's nothing you need to do to protect your data. And if you do have a failure, because even some of the most robust hardware has failure, you can put it right back the way it was. So our practices here for backing up and restoring are basically combine each flavor to create the solution you're most comfortable with that'll fit your enterprise's mitigate the amount of risk you want to have for failure or something like that. And make sure that everything is documented and audited, what that system is supposed to do. These are basically just best practices in IT. But then generally, combine whatever best solution you have, or the different flavors here, to pick the one that best suits your enterprise. And remembering that, a couple of these things, or 3 of them, can happen automatically and need to be set up just once. So definitely pick at least two of the 4. I would do an archive and the online, definitely. Okay, questions time.
Okay, sorry about that. I had my phone on mute. Okay, so we do have, there's at least a couple of questions in here. And just as a reminder, if you have a question to put in, you can find the question box. If it's minimized, use the orange arrow in the upper corner, and then you should see the question area down toward the bottom. So Pat, the first question, what release is the incremental speech backup offered?
8.7 SU1.
Okay, so that's brand new.
Well, no, let me go back.
Oh, no. Okay.
All right, this new fancy thing that I just showed, that's brand new. That just came out. Where you have the cool thing like this, that's brand new. That came out like last week. That being said, in these backup folders, the speech is being incrementally backed up, but it's happening in a batch process rather than real time. So it's always had the backup. The online backup has always done that. It's just it happens at daily maintenance rather than refreshed throughout the day.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Pat. Next question, does the system prompt you, are you sure, after pressing the database initialization button as a safeguard?
Yes, it does. I almost want to say it'll come back and say, are you really sure? It used to.
2 chances back out.
You have 2 chances to ruin your life. I know that in that same, well, I might as well show this. In the database tab, when you do that, it will come back and ask you at least once, purge, if you purge all your mailboxes and stuff like that. If you hit that key, I don't think it asks. Or if it does, it only asks once, and then bam, it's gone. So you got to be careful with that. But yes, it does. I'm almost tempted to do it, but we really only have 10 minutes.
Maybe next time.
Just make sure you have
a dedicated session just for that.
Make sure you have a backup before you do that.
Okay, another question. We have physical servers today. What would prevent us from moving to virtual?
Hardware phone integrations. That's it. If you have a SIP integration or VoIP, you can have everything running on virtual machines. You can certainly move the system server. A lot of people do it. But the limitation is a dialogic card needs an actual physical hardware. So that is about the only limitation. The one that you're seeing here today, my demo system, that is running on a virtual machine, and it's running NEC 3C system on it. So yeah, there's no hardware there at all. And
okay.
starting with 8.7, we support Microsoft Hyper-V. So you have 2 choices of a virtual machine. That's very common, by the way. The last 3 of these things I've installed for actual customers, that's how they did it.
Okay, great, Pat. So that one, we can certainly, the individual who asked that, we can certainly, if needed, have one of our sales reps follow up just to take a look at the configuration and integration and all of that, just to see what the options are there, if that's helpful. So that actually looks like that's all the questions, unless someone is still typing. So I guess that means Pat covered everything very clearly, and there's no, oh wait, here we go. There's one more. Okay, I'll talk slower in case anyone else is still typing. So Pat, here's this one. You mentioned support for WM Mobile ICA being a load balancer that is using Citrix ICA, correct?
No, the ICA is our integrated client access. I think we're talking about a hardware load balancer there.
Okay, I can forward that question back to you if in
Well,
case there's.
just remember, these are Windows applications. Web Phone Manager, mobile services, they're running on IIS. They're just a website. So any way that you would manage connections through a website works for them. And the ICA, the Integrated Client Access, that is running IMAP. So any way that you would load balance IMAP will work as well.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like that does wrap us up. So just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us. As I mentioned, we did record, and so we will make the recording available to you if you have coworkers that maybe missed it. Actually, we are rerunning this same session next week. That's on Tuesday at 11 Pacific, Tuesday the 12th. So if you got the email invite for this, the link to sign up for that one is there as well in case you have, again, someone in your office that missed it. And if there are any follow-on questions, you can certainly send those to our user group at avst.com email. That's obviously not a place to get free support, but if there's questions that pertain to this topic that can be routed to Pat, we'll certainly get those answered for you. So anything else to add, Pat?
Yeah, if you're looking at the screen now, these two documents have lots of detail on what you can do with backups and restores and archives.
Okay, well, I'll dig that up. I'll send that in a follow-up email to all the attendees so everyone has that. Those should also be available on our user forum in the documentation area as well. So, so I think we're good. Thanks for joining, everyone, awesome. And have a great day.
All righty.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.